Hello, I'm Ronan Hart with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. I'm joined by Vasilios Kosmakos and Carol Fall, and it is October 13th, 2021 at 4:35 p.m. So I guess to get started, Carol, if you could tell us about where you were born and when.
Wow, okay. So I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1953.
Okay, could you tell us anything about your parents, what they did, if you have siblings?
Sure, let's see. My dad was an engineer with US Steel, and I have a brother and a sister. And my mom was a houseworker, homemaker.
Mm-hmm. And I assume you went to college after high school. Where did you go to college?
I did. I went to college at Florida Institute of Technology in Melbourne. Yeah. My degree's in oceanography. I watched way too much Jacques Cousteau when I was a teenager. So I was going to be an oceanographer. So yeah, so that's where I graduated from college, was in Florida.
Mm-hmm. And you picked Florida just because it seemed like, connected to oceanography down by the beach?
Yeah. I wanted to go out to California to Scripps. My parents wouldn't let me go that far away. So Florida was a compromise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what was your path from there and getting that degree into water management in Florida?
So after I graduated from FIT with my bachelor's, I went to work for a consultant that was doing the waste load allocations for Brevard County. So I was doing water quality sampling in the St. Johns River and the Indian River Lagoon in Brevard County. So that project ended in 1977. So I was looking around for another job. I didn't want to go to the main headquarters of this consulting company, which was in Philadelphia. So I went to work for the Water Management District starting in April of 1978. Mm-hmm. And they basically hired me to do the same thing I'd already been doing, to do the water quality monitoring on the St. Johns River and Indian River Lagoon. So kind of kept doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Were you pretty much doing that kind of work through the rest of your time at the district?
And basically, yeah, water quality oriented. So I went to work for what was then the Environmental Sciences Division. Back when the Water Management District was originally in their old offices on Highway 17, Highway 19. So I was doing water quality monitoring, and that morphed into a lot of work on the Upper St. Johns River Basin Plan. I did that for pretty much 10 years, doing a lot of database management, other water quality issues. I did Seagrass Bed Surveys on the Indian River Lagoon. One of the reasons the Upper Basin project, as originally envisioned, got stopped was because the plan was just to dump all the floodwaters over onto the coast, which has an impact on the lagoon and that kind of more brackish water system. So I was looking at those water quality impacts and the seagrass beds. Then I started doing a lot of water quality monitoring on the farms in the Upper St. Johns, kind of looking at the water quality of their discharges, and then what different kinds of management practices would improve the water quality. So that was kind of like a 10-year road from basic water quality monitoring to more implementing that, incorporating that into the design of the Upper Basin project.
Mm-hmm. Was that just a change in kind of your responsibilities, or was that a change in like the directives of the district?
More change in my responsibilities. When I started there weren't very many people at the water management district. So as they grew and added a lot more people, then people got more specialized. So my role was initially going out and collecting the water samples, bring them back, run the samples in the lab. All right. And then they divided it to me going out and do the water sampling, somebody else running the lab. Then they kind of, over 10 years, different promotions, it ends up being, actually trying to help design the Upper Basin project. So,
and so describe the kind of the issues you were kind of, looking at, right? So what exactly were you looking at? Like what exactly were you trying to find in the water samples, right? What were some of the kind of major issues at the time?
So the issues were basically, were the farms meeting the water quality standards? That was back in the late 70s, early 80s. So it was when EPA was trying to do, the 303D, what water bodies didn't meet water quality standards, what were waste load allocations. So it was just in that mode of who doesn't meet water quality standards, why don't they? And then how do you bring them into compliance?
Great. So we were kind of wondering if you can kind of discuss, some of the governors, right, that were kind of, and then kind of their approaches that exist during your tenure at the water management, in water management. So who was governor when you kind of first started, and kind of what was his style as opposed to the succeeding ones?
Governor, when I first started, was Ruben Askew. Yeah, because when I was in college, in Melbourne, one of the big environmental issues at the time was the Cross Florida Barge Canal. So, all the college students were all doing our environmental protesting and stuff. And, Askew was pretty receptive to environmental concerns. Then, trying to think, then it was Bob Graham. And same thing, he was into, kind of, protecting wetlands and cleaning up water quality issues and all that stuff. Bob.
And I think Martinez might be next.
Bob Martinez, that's it. Gosh, yeah, he was not. What can I say? And then Lawton Childs. Lawton Childs was great. He's also very into, how to protect the wetlands in the state and all that kind of stuff. And we left when Jeb Bush got elected because we could kind of see the handwriting on the wall.
So, I know you kind of just briefly mentioned, their amicability or lack thereof, right? But how did your projects more or less change, as kind of these governors kind of transitioned? I mean, was your work relatively consistent? Did it change, drastically? When Martinez was governor, how did that kind of happen?
I don't think at a staff level, I don't think there was super direct change. There would be political pressure on the governing board, who was appointed to the board, and then on the executive director to be more or less amenable to what different developers or agricultural interests were proposing. So, with the Republican governor, it just seemed more, you want to kind of help the developers get their developments done and all that kind of stuff. Less pressure and more support, both funding wise, with the land acquisition programs and all that when there was a Democratic governor.
Could you tell us about those land acquisition programs?
Yeah, I think it was more involved from the periphery at the end, I think I mentioned this in my email, but one of the things I was doing, I was trying to keep the farms in business. I said my dad was an engineer, but he was also from a farming family. So I have a good relationship with farmers. I spent the first 10 years of research at the Water Management District working with the farms, trying to, figure out what was working, what wasn't in terms of water quality practices. And so then when I moved into the regulatory arena, I was still working with the farms, I was trying to keep them in business. That's my MO, figure out how to bring them into compliance with the water quality standards, but keep them in business. Which to a certain extent was working at cross purposes with the land acquisition people, because the land acquisition people were wanting to buy a lot of the farms in order to, protect wetlands or whatever their MO was. And so here I am trying to keep the farms in business, and here's the land acquisition people trying to use me a little bit as a tool to beat them over the head and make them sell out. So I was not always going down the same path as the land acquisition folks.
Mhm.
So kind of discuss that a little bit more, though. So it's like you obviously kind of have to balance, a lot of different stakeholders, at the same time. What was your process for that? What were some of the really major issues that farmers kind of had in terms of like non-compliance or kind of their quote unquote beef with like some of their with some of the rules? How did you kind of convince them to kind of follow it? Otherwise, how did you go about striking that balance?
Well, I think it comes from being a mixed family with an engineer and a farmer family. So I used to joke that I was kind of used to translating between the two. And so the Water Management District over time, they implemented a lot of rules. I mean, there weren't very many when I first started. They were just doing consumptive use permits, and then they started doing all these other regulatory programs. And I could see the way regulators like to work is they like black and white. They like a rule. You do this and you're in compliance with the rule. Okay, I can check that box. It doesn't always get you what you want, the end product, which is clean water. And so I'm more oriented towards what are you trying to get to? You're trying to get to the water being clean. And I'm a lot more flexible on how you get there than just this is what the rule says. So so I would go out with the regulatory people and talk to the farms, and the regulatory people would say, the rule says you have to do X, Y, Z. They would just start off with that, hi, how are you? You have to do X, Y, Z. I know that the farmer protocol is how's the weather, how's the cattle prices, kick the dirt a little bit. You talk to them, and then you say, okay, so here's the deal. We got to meet these water quality standards. How do you think you can meet them? And so give them some flexibility, let them think it's their own idea, right? That's how you get things done in my book. And so when I wrote chapter 40C44, the ag discharge permit rule, that's what I was trying to do. I was saying, you can take the easy way out. You get one of these general permits. It's cheaper. You just check the boxes, but it may not get you where you really want to go. You can apply for an individual permit, and it's going to give you this flexibility. You can say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have fewer cattle on my ranch. decrease the cattle density. I'm gonna come up with literally we had people say, I'm gonna decrease my fertilizer application and rotate my cattle more. That's how I'm going to meet the water quality standards. And we'd say, fine, good, we'll monitor it, we'll see if that worked. Somebody else would say, I have this wetland, this low spot on my property, I'm going to run all the discharge through there, I'm going to see if the wetland cleans it up. We'd say, fine, okay, we'll see if that works, we'll monitor it, we'll let you know. So it's just a more flexible approach, in terms of, and so the farmers like that. I think as a stakeholder, but again, there was always this kind of stalking horse behind him, which is if you didn't meet the water quality standards, if you weren't making enough money, the land acquisition people would be happy to buy you out.
Did you find that approach you took was supported by other people at the district? Did other people have similar attitudes? Or were they more like kind of hardline in dealing with farmers?
Yeah, initially they were really thrilled. I got Employee of the Year for doing it the first year we did it. Over time, they were let's say the first 5-6 years of doing that, all the farmers that were willing to try something got their permits, and they were pretty, okay with that. Then we had some real serious holdouts, the ones that I don't care, I'm not going to do anything. And then it got a little bit more adversarial. So it's just kind of working through that list of people that were interested in trying something versus the ones at the very end that were like, you can't make me do anything.
Mm-hmm.
So would you kind of mind discussing that, that statute you just kind of mentioned, right? The chapter 40C 44, thing, just tell me exactly what it is, and kind of why that, what it is, why it's important, and what its implications were kind of going forward.
Well, so let's see, if I back up a little bit. So I worked for the Water Resources Department for 10 years, doing the water quality monitoring, looking at what agricultural best management practices would work.
And what years were these?
Huh?
What years? What time frame?
That would be from 78 to 88.
Okay.
And then in like 1987, the Water Management District was taking the research I had done, incorporating it along with all the other research into the development of the Upper St. John's water management, the plan, that was approved by the Corps of Engineers. Here's how we're going to restore this, the headwaters of the St. John's. So, they went from, the earlier Corps of Engineers flood control project to we're going to, have all these water detention areas, the marsh conservation areas. We're going to, have this less structural way to address flooding. And so, I could see that the next step was going to be making the farms fit with that restoration program. At the same time, the Department of Environmental Regulation was delegating these regulation of these farm discharges to the Water Management District. That was in 1988. So it just seemed logical to me, like, okay, I'm going to take my research on what works, and then I'm going to actually help farms implement it in the Upper St. John's. So that's kind of why I went from research to implementation. And part of that implementation then was developing the regulation, that chapter C44. It took what was DER had regulated these farm discharges, which are through pumps, as industrial waste for some reason. It's like, that doesn't fit at all. That it was just because they had a point source, a pump that they could claim they were industrial waste, and they could try to make that criteria apply. And that wasn't, I mean, that's the kind of thing you do for, some sort of citrus processing plant or something. It doesn't apply. So, so I was trying to then come up with a new set of rules that would get us to the point we wanted to get to, which is meeting the water quality standards, but in a way that was more applicable and more flexible. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
And I would say it was a little bit, a little bit different than most regulatory programs in that not only did we have the regulation, we had a research component with it because I brought that with me. And we had a matching fund component. So I actually convinced the water management district to set aside funds to help the farms do some of the things we were asking them to do. So it was kind of like a three-pronged thing. It was, okay, yeah, you're going to have to do this, but we're going to make sure that it's getting us where we want to be, and we're going to help you pay for it.
And give me a little bit more context and kind of what the situation, in this area is kind of looking like, right? So obviously, right, you kind of mentioned the kind of the corridor thing where it's like, they're buying the land from the farmers, et cetera, right? But why, is this kind of discharge that the farmers are doing, problem? What is the goal over? Like, why is the district focusing on water quality to begin with? Was there specific instances or a specific instance where there was a really big issue, that kind of spurred kind of like action? Give me some context on kind of what's happening here. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the way those farms are set up, they encroach into the floodplain, and they build a levee, and they then pump the water behind the levee to keep the land dry enough to farm out into what's left of the floodplain. I always say it's the think about Holland kind of approach. So those big pumps, when they discharge, they did not meet state water quality standards for nutrients, for dissolved oxygen, for BOD, or for chloride. So, so they weren't meeting state water quality standards. That was the bottom line. And that's why, they were being told they had to change, their operation to come into compliance.
And this was roughly the mid, 80s, 70s? What year was this again?
It'd be the early 80s. Yeah.
Okay. There were a few things you mentioned when you're talking initially about what you did that I want to come back to. In preparing for this, we were reading some of the history of the district, and we saw that the lab, the water quality lab, was established in 78. So the first year that you're working there, and you said you worked in it. Were you one of the first people to work in that lab?
Yeah. So like I said, another employee and another environmental specialist and I would go out and collect the water samples, bring them back, and run the analysis in the lab, which was kind of an overgrown closet. Seriously, it was about 8 feet by maybe 20 feet bigger. That's about as big as it was. And that was in the old office on Highway 19.
Is that by Palaka?
Yeah, it's on the north side of Palaka.
Mm-hmm. So what was that like, trying to do your science in this? I imagine it's just sort of a trailer kind of.
Yeah, well, I'd have to say, I think I told you in the email, I'm always interested in how organizations change. And so when we're first starting, it was kind of like working for a tech startup, it's really informal, really flexible, people would do different tasks, you know, you weren't stuck in a box. So, you know, it wouldn't matter whether or not I was doing water quality sampling one day, the next day I might be out helping one of the geologists, you know, plug a well or something. And so, yeah. So yeah, I worked in the lab until, like I said, as the agency got bigger, it started dividing up the tasks. And then they created a lab manager position who was stuck running all the lab analysis. And then I diverged into just doing the field sampling and then more the research end.
Mm-hmm. Are there other kind of notable ways that the structure or anything else about the district changed over time, or maybe changes in attitude or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, you know, working for environmental sciences, we had all the environmentally oriented people. That's kind of redundant, but I heard Pat talk a little bit about this. I mean, when we first started, you know, they had just transferred the field stations from Moss Bluff and Melbourne into the water management district, like 6 months before I got there. So, you know, had all the guys with the wearing the uniforms and coming from South Florida, kind of having a more militaristic Corps of Engineers kind of approach to things, or just, you know, the way they've been employed. And then you had all these crazy environmental specialists who didn't wear uniforms. You know, we wear cutoffs out in the field, and we didn't talk on the radio right, and all that stuff. So, yeah, right. So there was that initial like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with the two different types of groups? Eventually, you know, we get along, you know, we kind of learned each other's kind of quirks. But then, yeah, as the agency grew, I mean, we weren't doing very much regulation to start with. And then you add all these regulatory programs and a whole new department that's just dedicated to regulation. And that changed the culture. All of a sudden, there wasn't just this research component. It was like, now we're telling people what to do kind of attitude. And rapid growth during that, you know, we moved into the new building, we added tons of employees. We had the cubicle wars, you know, so that, you know, there was that kind of change in how everything operated. Mm-hmm. And then it got, you know, to the, you know, the maturity stage where, you know, now you got the retired Corps of Engineers guys come in, and there's a lot more written policies and less flexibility. And there's the big fancy offices for the land acquisition and the executive director and the lawyers. And so, yeah, it just definitely changed over time, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Would you credit those changes to just kind of adapting to like the outside world changing, or was there maybe like someone in the district who thought those were the changes that needed to happen?
I think it was basically the legislature just dumping more and more responsibilities on the water management district. You know, it went to, you know, like I said, all of a sudden it's the surface water management programs, and you're restoring not just the Upper Basin, but the Ocklawaha and Apopka and the Indian River Lagoon. You have all the Save Our Rivers programs, and, you know, just all these new legislative initiatives kind of dumped on the district.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned the surface water management. So were you there when the SWIM Act, the Surface Water Improvement Management Act, what kind of changes came with that?
Well, it focused attention on certain basins that needed to be restored. And then it really increased the coordination with DER on water quality monitoring, you know, kind of, you know, DER really was kind of like, you're going to be doing XYZ. So yeah, it was mostly more more work.
So kind of backtracking a bit, right? Would you kind of mind discussing some of the specific best management practices you kind of implemented, right? What were some that kind of got more better traction, what were some that kind of, took a while for people to kind of catch up on?
So the big one was detention basins. So the farms that I was dealing with for a large part were out in the floodplain. So essentially it's trying to recreate a part of the floodplain that they would discharge into, then they would irrigate back out of. I mean, one of the issues, like I said earlier, they weren't meeting water quality standards for chloride. So, because they were using a lot of artesian wells for irrigation. So by collecting their drainage water in a big pond and then using that for irrigation instead, they were solving their chloride problems. They were solving their oxygen and BOD problems because they had these big kind of flat marshes. And they were addressing most of their nutrient problems. So the detention basins, some of them put in huge ones that later became a selling point. Like Deseret took their big detention basin and started selling wetland mitigation credits from it.
Really?
Yeah, so that was one way to recoup some of the cost of building that basin. Otherwise, we were trying to get them to implement a lot of conservation practices. I was working pretty closely with the Soil Conservation Service. So it was things like I said, decreasing your fertilizer usage, rotating your crops, your cows more often. Some of them had issues with pesticides, so we were putting in pesticide containment structures. Some of them had diesel and oil spills. We were putting in diesel and oil containment structures. Just a combination of a lot of little things. More efficient irrigation, so then they had less discharge.
So this is I guess kind of my ignorance to the way some of this stuff works. But when you say something like diesel or oil containment structures, is that literally a physical structure somewhere in the basin? How does that work? What is that?
So these big pumps that are sitting on levees that discharge into the remaining floodplain, they don't get a lot of maintenance. And so, yes, every once in a while, a diesel tank would rupture and you'd have a bunch of diesels, fuel spilled into the wetlands and stuff. So the containment structures were just big concrete bathtubs. So whenever, if they had a spill or a leak, it would collect in there instead of getting out into the wetlands.
Oh, because it's heavier, so it kind of sinks through the water. Is that the idea?
Well, it's just a concrete containment structure. So it's like a concrete bathtub. Okay. So the tank is sitting up on the top of a levee. And if it breaks for some reason, then the diesel just spills into a concrete structure until they can come out and pump it back out or deal with it some other way.
Okay, I see. I have my visualization of it now.
Okay, yeah.
And kind of going off that, right? You kind of mentioned that you were trying to create a phosphorus train credit system in Makapopka. Would you mind kind of telling us about that? And you didn't mention how you didn't know if it's gotten implemented, but that's a pretty interesting concept. So can you explain a little bit more?
Yeah, after I sent you that, I was thinking a little bit more about what actually happened. So so Lake Apopka is like a big bowl. And so unlike the Upper St. John's, it's a little bit more confined as far as all the different sources of pollution that dump into this bowl and it sloshes around. So, and there was discharges from the farms, the muck farms, from a wastewater treatment plant, which we didn't have in Upper St. John's, a peat mine, just runoff from, urban areas. And so the research people came up with a limit on there should be only this amount of phosphorus going into Lake Apopka. And so we thought the most innovative way to actually accomplish that was to actually just say, each of you gets so many phosphorus credits, how much you can discharge. But if it's not economically feasible for you to reduce that level to what it need to be reduced to, you can trade them. So for example, the farms could pay the wastewater treatment plant to upgrade the quality of the wastewater treatment plant, or they could actually, one of them paid for the peat mine to essentially go out of business and took their phosphorus credits. That was the approach. It didn't actually get implemented. I went and looked. There was a lot of legal stuff about, the modeling that they used and everything. I mean, I was kind of on my way out when they were wrangling over that. So it did not get implemented. But at the time, EPA was really thrilled. I mean, they were like, yeah, this will work. You can, figure out the economic way for them to settle it as far as the most efficient economic way to reduce phosphorus loading going into the lake. And instead they ended up buying the farms.
So kind of, now moving a little bit more into the present and future, right? I mean, obviously I know you haven't kind of, touched really the water management stuff in a couple of years, right? But, phosphorus is obviously kind of a big issue, even contemporarily speaking. What do you think are some ways better, if you have any insight?
Well, so let me just say, so the water management district in the late 90s started getting what I call snake oil salesmen for how to get rid of phosphorus, or how to capture phosphorus. So my regulatory group was focused on reducing, was focused on bringing the farms into compliance, but we were the only group within the regulatory department that was doing any kind of research or monitoring. So these ideas on how to reduce phosphorus kept getting dumped on us to evaluate and monitor. So there would be things like, let's inject alum into stormwater runoff. That's aluminum, and it would form an aluminum phosphate flock that would settle to the bottom of the lake. Let's try that. So we would have a consultant propose to do that, and we would do the monitoring and write up the report and say, this is really expensive. We had one company, it was a Defense Department contractor that, as part of the downsizing, was trying to diversify. SAIC, can't remember what that stands for. But same thing, they talked Henry Dean into, let's look at periphyton filtration. We'll take the water from the lake and we'll run it over a real shallow kind of a concrete washboard, and we'll scrape the algae off that concrete washboard and we'll sell it for cosmetics. So we looked at that. That didn't work. Yeah. So anyway, my point is that the water management district, it kind of went to this, what's the latest shiny ball that we're going to look at in terms of phosphorus removal. So I don't know what they're doing now. but they were doing it back then.
Would you attribute that change to like anyone in particular, like the board or the executive director?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of, the agency. I thought, personally, I just thought they were kind of losing their focus. In the late 90s, there was a lot more political input. It started to be, well, let's look at the mitigation banks. Let's use a wastewater treatment plant, wetland treatment system, which is designed to remove phosphorus. But now we're going to give them credit as a mitigation bank. Just all this kind of political kind of massaging and appeasing and trading and all that kind of stuff. And so the shiny ball thing, let's look at all these different kind of wacky ideas on how to remove phosphorus. That was just part and parcel of that. Sorry, that's my personal opinion.
I mean, this is the place for personal opinions. So in a sense. So if my kind of history is right, it seems like there were three different executive directors in your time at the district. There was Fred Russo,
Fred Rouse, yeah.
Yeah, Rouse, Vergara, and Henry Dean. Do you see a lot of like differences there in like approach or managerial style, or just what it was like to work with them?
Yeah, so Fred Rouse was the executive director when I started. He was just kind of a pretty quiet, nondescript kind of guy. I think it was a little overwhelmed when we started adding all these other responsibilities. Sonny Vergara came on. Sonny was, I'd say of all the directors I worked with, he was the most straight shooter. He kind of would tell you where he stood. Henry Dean, a little bit more of a political animal, kind of an excellent, politician in terms of navigating the difficulties of the water management district. But yeah, you wouldn't always know what direction he was headed because he would change. And then actually Dennis Oth, I think Dennis was the first, I don't know. He was there on and off as a consultant, when Sonny was there. So he had gotten let go by the governing board, but he kept coming back, hanging out with the environmental specialists, telling us what we need to be doing. So yeah, so definitely different each one.
Mm-hmm.
And then, would you mind kind of discussing, how you think? So there was a change, right, at one point between what was it, Ronan? The way water
control to
flood control to water permitting and consumption, right? Would you kind of mind telling us, like, your experiences as you kind of went through that transition within the district?
So yeah, I mean, when I first started, they were taking over the Upper St. John, the design of the Upper St. John's project. So when I was in college, it had been stopped, the major flood control approach, because of the concerns about things like dumping fresh water over to the coast. And so, so there were some engineers that came over from South Florida, Dr. Tai, Dr. Rao, but clearly the emphasis, the walking instructions that we had in environmental sciences was to come up with something different. And so we were shifting away from pure flood control to restoration. And at the same time, there was the consumptive use program, which was looking at water efficiency and all that. And that was shifting, adding on to the MSSW, the Management Storage of Surface Waters program, which had a water quality component in terms of meeting water quality standards. So yeah, it definitely changed from flood control and strictly consumptive use to this whole broader picture of restoration, ecosystems with the land acquisition, just the whole looking at how everything fit together.
And I'm not sure if this is relevant to your time or not, right? But and correct me if I'm wrong here, but one of the ways they try to manage kind of flood control, right, is that they kind of straighten out a lot of these rivers in Florida, right? But now they're kind of finding that like, okay, the rivers are twisty-turny for a reason, and that's because it kind of decreases flooding. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Maybe based upon your background, as a biologist, if as a scientist, why is that important? Why was that mistake made, and what can be done kind of going forward?
Well, yeah, that was the whole thing with the Upper St. John's project, and then the restoration of the Upper Ocklawaha Basin. Was they had taken these broad floodplains where the water would just kind of meander and get cleaned up and slowly be released in terms of flood control, and they were realizing that natural approach was actually workable. And so so the environmental sciences group came up with a lot of the components, what we wanted to do with the restoration of the Upper St. John's. We turned around and said to the engineers, how do you do this? How do you mimic, a natural system? And so we luckily had a group of engineers that were, willing to tackle that design. It wasn't easy then to try to get that approved by the Corps of Engineers, because they had to do their cost benefit analysis and all that stuff. But I think it was just that period of time where, that recognition that, rivers are going to be rivers. You can't wall them off, it was the right time for that. I mean, it's the same thing out here with the Trinity River, where the Bureau of Reclamation is kind of trying to straighten it and control it. And then now they're putting the bends back in, and they're putting the large woody debris, the logs in that create riffles, and they're just kind of back to spending millions of dollars to get it to mimic a natural system again.
And again, this was mid 80s, correct? Where this was kind of when this was happening.
When was this? So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So when we were designing the Upper St. John's project, that was in the early 80s. I mean, okay. Final design was approved by the Corps of Engineers, I think in 87, something like that. Construction started in 88, but the actual design of really doing we want to mimic a natural river again, that was in the early 80s, mid 80s.
Cool. So, kind of based upon your opinion, right, in your kind of career in water management, generally speaking, right, how do you think water should be managed? Kind of everything kind of being said and done. You seem to have a very kind of specific, unique philosophy where, you're kind of more likely to work with the farmers, right? And I think that's a, very unique approach. So how do you think water should be managed, kind of generally speaking? Do you think more input should be given to small stakeholders? Do you think it needs to be kind of more top down, et cetera?
That's a good one. I don't know. It starts with a lot of people having to correct their ideas on how water works. I think it's probably both. You're going to need some top down. Here's what you want to be doing. But I think back to my approach, you need to be flexible on how you get there. So if some state or local government wants to stand up and say, we want to try something different, I think you ought to let them try something different.
Absolutely. And then, how do, from your kind of perspective, right? What do you think the future of water management kind of looks like? Do you think there's going to be, what issues do you kind of see on the horizon, especially with climate change kind of happening? What should we look forward to?
In Florida?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know in Florida. Yeah, I don't really know what you guys have been doing. We've been gone for 21 years, since early 99. So I don't really know what Florida's doing anymore. I do know I sound like a broken record out here where I say Western water law sucks. You guys need to implement Eastern water law because they have no clue. They're going to be with climate change and the new normal. They're going to be in trouble because they don't have a logical way to address water use. Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you have any more questions, Ronan?
Yeah, it's kind of a change of direction. But I guess coming into working at the district in the late 70s, early 80s with a lot of engineers, farmers. I think Pat said there's a lot like good old boys and kind of like good old boy attitudes to things. Is that something that was ever difficult for you, like as a woman, encountering these attitudes or being underestimated in like the culture of the district?
I never really had trouble with the guys at the field station. I just kind of like do my thing. I'm a pretty feisty person. And so the issues I had were always with the Corps of Engineers type people, because they're just very, what would I say, paternalistic. They think they're being protective, and I'm saying, I'm okay out on the boat by myself. No, you have to have two people on a boat. I'm okay doing diurnal studies, which means I'm 24 hours a day out in the marsh, every hour, and it's dark and all that stuff. And there's alligators, I get it, but they're like, you can't do that. I'm like, that's how you have to do a diurnal study. It means 24 hours a day. So my example would be, so to work in the Upper St. John's out in the marsh, you need to be able to drive an airboat. So we started off, the technician would drive and I would collect all the water samples. But I wasn't officially allowed to sign an airboat out. The guys would teach me how to drive the airboat anyway, because A, I've been around boats, that's why I do water quality monitoring. And B, if something ever happened, they wanted me to be able to get them back to safety, right? But the management type were like, well, we don't want you to be able to officially sign out an airboat. But the management types, we're going to sign out, we're going to learn how to drive airboats because we want to be able to take people on tours, when the mucky mucks would show up. So I got frustrated and I did. I threatened to sue them with a discrimination suit because I said, you're letting all the guys sign out airboats and learn how to drive them. How come I can't? So the result was they came up with a new policy that everyone who drove an airboat had to pass a test, a written test, and then essentially driving test. So I was the first one to get my airboat license, but then all the other guys at the field stations who had been driving airboats since they were little kids had to pass the same test. So that led to unmerciful teasing, the Carroll Fall airboat test. But I mean, that's the kind of thing. So they would try to be protective. It would be me pushing back, and then it would be a new policy. So
wow.
That's okay. I that's how it was back then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good answer, though. Before we finish up, is anything else coming to mind in terms of stories like that, or little anecdotes, or just anything you want to kind of put into the historical record here?
Oh, I got lots of stories. But I would say one that's kind of illustrative is when I first started working at the district. Again, it's like a tech startup where everybody's doing everybody else's job. I'm hired to do water quality stuff. The Hurricane David, 1979, was coming up the coast, and it was originally like a Category 5. It got downgraded to like a 1 by the time it hit Florida, but they didn't know what it's going to be. But they essentially took me down to S96. That's the flood control structure on one of the big diversion canals that goes from the Upper St. John's to the Indian River Lagoon. And they said, yeah, we know you're an environmental specialist, but if the floodwaters get to this level, push this button. If they get to this level, push this button. If they get to this level, just like you're doomed. And so, but it was like no cross training, just, okay, everybody has to do whatever you got to do. They would never let you do that nowadays. So it was a lot more free form when they started versus kind of the mature agency that they are now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I won't bore you with stories.
I mean, this is both the time and the place. If you have any more?
No, I mean, so, just to illustrate my trying to develop some credibility with the farmers, I'm out there, I'm used to talking to them about cattle and stuff. And then they sent out a new environmental specialist that was in the regulatory department, and she's out on a cow calf operation. It's Deseret Ranch, which is 300,000 acres of essentially beef cattle. And she asked them how they get the cows back to the barn to milk them every day. And so I'm just like, oh, my credibility just went, yep. So, it's that kind of thing. One step forward, 2 steps back. Right.
Yeah, maybe so. All
One of
right,
the-
if there's nothing else, we could wrap up now.
Yeah. If I can just say, one of the, I think the most important kind of takeaways from your story is just kind of like, just kind of the way you kind of operated. I mean, that's something I really respect, someone that is also interested in sustainable development. It's like, I think your story is a really kind of great way of kind of understanding like kind of the attitude you kind of need to have to kind of really, make these changes. It's like, you can't come in knowing anything. It's like, you have to, be sociable, you have to be amicable. And I think that's an incredibly important trait that most people don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, to me, you just have to be a problem solver, and versus like I said, black and white by the book. This is what the rule says, so this is what I got to do. I'm looking more at the end goal. But I also say since I moved to California, I went to work for the University of California Cooperative Extension, and a lot with their small farm program, trying to get small farms to compete better with the cannabis growers, and trying to keep farms in business is a tough job. It's a losing proposition. It's a Don Quixote tilting at windmills thing, whether it's in Florida or here, but somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, hopefully that helped.
It helped tremendously. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, yes.
All right. Good luck with your project, guys.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so
We appreciate
much.
it.